It's now my pleasure to introduce a great friend of the New England Museum Association. Dr. Ford W. Bell began his tenure as president of the American Association of Museums in June of 2007. He brings to AAM a lifelong passion for museums and a clear understanding of the important role which museums play as places of lifelong learning and inspiration. Ford has more than 30 years' experience as a nonprofit executive, board chair, donor, trustee, and educator with institutions including the Minneapolis Institute of Arts and the Museum of Natural History at the University of Minnesota. To show how much faith he has in NEMA, Ford has agreed to subject himself to a dangerous new format at the NEMA Conference. Rather than just have him give a presentation of what AAM is up to this year, we'll be hearing from Ford about the state of museums nationally through an interactive interview. Now, I have a few questions prepared to get the conversation started, but I'd ask each of you and invite you to ask your own questions as well. Just use the index cards you received when you entered the ballroom and write down your question. Then pass the cards on to one of our volunteers along the aisles during our interview. They'll bring your question up to the front and I'll ask away for you. So without further ado, I'd like you to join me in welcoming AAM President Ford Bell. Well, thank you, Ford, for coming. I do appreciate it. And what a terrific turnout we have to hear you. A couple of questions for you. AAM, first of all, over the past few years has ramped up a very significant advocacy effort. Tell us a little about where the effort stands now and how yesterday's election news will impact it.
What news? Was there an election? Well, you're right, Dan. We have significantly augmented our advocacy, our government relations capacity at AAM over the last 3 years, and we have a great team in place. But, of course, we depend on all of you and our colleagues in museums across the country to help make that effective. We started our first advocacy day in 2009, and we're continuing to develop that concept. We'll have our third advocacy day next year in 2011 and in Washington, D.C., where, as some of you who have been there know, people come from all over the country to Washington and with a day of intense educational experience are converted into expert lobbyists. And our goal is to have somebody from each of the 435 congressional districts in the United States there in next February 28th, March 1st in Washington. I think the key thing about this is to look at the discussion draft. Now, all bets are off after that election, but the discussion draft of the bill to reauthorize IMLS, which was written by the staff in Senator Jack Reed's office, Jack Reed from Rhode Island, as you're probably all aware. And what's interesting and great about that, it's a discussion draft, and we got a long way to go, but for the first time, it really includes some very important language. For instance, it provides that next year there'd be a 40% increase in IMLS funding, which would be fantastic, from $35 million to $50 million, and then continuing over the next 5 years up to $95 million. It also includes a federal-state funding partnership that we've talked about a lot and that many of you here in the room worked very, very hard on. And it includes language that says when the IMLS appropriation gets to $45 million, the $2 million will be allocated to begin the process of doing state needs assessments, which is the first step in creating a federal-state funding partnership. So we're very excited about that, and we definitely have a long way to go. But we got there. We got this discussion draft for one reason. We all came together, and we asked for the same thing. And for the first time ever, people from our colleagues in the museum field and AAM staff worked with Senator Reed's office on developing that language that's in the discussion draft. That hasn't happened before. Our library colleagues have done it forever. But this is the first time we've done it. So there's a huge potential for us in staying united, in working together, and in collaborating. Now, there's many a slip between the cup and the lip when it comes to federal legislation. So the battle isn't over, but we've taken a small step forward.
But it's a constant process.
Constant process.
And the more, the merrier, too. The more folks we have involved in Museum Advocacy Day, the better.
The more people we have involved from the more different fields across the spectrum of museums, the better.
So, Ford, I'm really looking forward to the 2011 AAM conference in Houston, which has the theme, The Museum of Tomorrow. Perhaps you could give us a sneak preview of what's in store for us there.
Well, we've got 160 program sessions, and we're really working to rethink the annual meeting experience in every aspect of it, right down to for the first time ever, we have an exhibitor advisory committee to tell us how we can improve the experience for the exhibitors and how they can do a better job working with all of you. We've looked at those 160 program sessions. How can we begin talking about future challenges? How can we begin talking about what lies ahead for us and how we can address some of the challenges that face our field? And we've looked at one of the changes we're looking at we will make is instead of having 2 keynotes, we love our keynotes, but one of those sessions will be a town hall forum where we hope to attract, I'm not going to go out on any limbs here, but we hope to attract a member of Congress to participate via a TV screen, via satellite feed, along with government elected officials in Houston, school board representatives, to talk about, get their take. How do they view museums? How do they view us as partners in what they're doing? Where do they rank us in the overall hierarchy of educational institutions in this country? And do they understand that we are essential educational institutions? So we're looking at that, and it will continue to be a very international meeting. We're going to do simultaneous translation into Arabic, as well as Spanish and Mandarin this year, and we're going to continue to welcome. We had our highest international attendance ever in Los Angeles. We believe at AAM that we all have an opportunity to learn from each other, and so I think it makes for a richer meeting to have broad international participation.
Absolutely, yeah. There's one thing that I noticed at the annual meeting this past year was just incredible globalism that we've got, and it brings up actually one of the questions that we are starting to talk about here at NEMA, and that is the whole issue of diversity and multiculturalism in museums. Statistically, the sad part is that we know that we don't have a great heterogeneous mix of museum visitors and so forth. What are the things that AAM's doing? What are the things that you're seeing that museums are doing to try to basically align themselves a little bit more?
It's a huge challenge. The Center for the Future of Museums, our Center for the Future of Museums, has put out 2 reports on the changing landscape in the United States, on the fact we'll be a majority-minority nation by 2050, if not before, and that's going to have huge ramifications for our field, for museum attendance, for funding, and as well as huge opportunities for us in addition. So we've put those out. They've had really, really great acceptance. We did a session with the California Association of Museums this year in LA around, they wanted to look at their future. What is the future of museums in California and their significant demographic makeup in California? They're a very diverse state among American states. And so we're going to continue to do that kind of thing. It's really important, as you know, about 1 in 10 of museum visitors, it represents a racial or ethnic minority. And in my hometown of Minneapolis, where we have a very significant Somali population, we don't see them in the Minneapolis Institute of Arts. It's free every single day. But when they walk by the street, it doesn't occur to representatives of people from our Somali population in Minneapolis to say, I'm going to go in there and see what's there. I'll spend 20 minutes. It doesn't cost me anything. We've got to do a better job of reaching out to the communities. We've got to take our museums out to the communities. And then what are the things that we can do in our museums to bring people in that may not seem to be totally related to our mission? Can we do English, and I know there are museums that are doing this, English as second language classes, citizenship preparation classes, cultural events, educational events that don't relate, preschool reading classes for immigrant children. I know the Lakeland Children's Museum in Florida is doing that and has for a long time. These create for them whole new connections in the communities.
If you could create your ideal museum, using the best practices of real existing museums, preferably a few in New England, what would it look like?
Well, for me, as a museum professional, I'm not. I'm still a veterinarian, so I've never been in the position of having to design a museum. But I think that we see lots of good practices today with museums, such as allowing people to curate their own shows, allowing them to use their cell phone, their personal device. I don't have one of those. I have a cell phone that winds up. It's so old. But but allowing them to come and make it their experience, not a predetermined experience with small little cards typed on the wall that are very, very hard to read and they're static. A museum that, I think it's a museum that reaches out and finds new ways. If it's an art museum, you know, I love when I go to these art museums, they make a big, they've got design shows. Design is a great way, modern design is a great way to get people involved, to get them in the door. And there's all kinds of things that science museums can do, hands-on kinds of exhibits, and there's intense interest in technology today. So what are the things that museums can do in terms of creative programming that will allow people to come and make it their experience, not the museum's experience?
Yeah. Customization.
Customization.
Yeah.
How do you customize your experience?
So, brief commercial message, index cards. Anybody have any questions? Hand them down the aisle to our volunteers, and they'll bring them up.
Let me just.
Oh, go ahead.
I want to make one unsolicited comment that goes back to the start, relating to advocacy. I don't have access to the names and addresses and emails of your trustees, your donors, your members, and your visitors. And I know that that warms the cockles of all of your hearts, that I don't. But you have access. And in terms of our advocacy, it's really important that we stop talking just to ourselves. We've got to get everybody who cares about museums to be involved in promoting the cause of museums. So the fact that IMLS, the Institute of Museum and Library Services, gives away $35 million a year to a field that has 850 million visits every year, a field where Americans donate 1 million hours every week of their time, every week. It just reflects the fact that Senator Coburn could introduce a bill to keep museums from getting funding under the stimulus package, underscores the fact that elected officials are not getting the message about the importance of our institutions and about how much Americans value our institutions. So I'm asking you, I'm giving all of you an assignment. I didn't clear this with Doug, so I'm probably in trouble, but I want you to ask your trustees, your members, your donors, your visitors to write one letter. One letter to whoever they want, to the mayor, city council member, county commissioner, state legislator, the governor, congressional representative, it doesn't matter. Ask them to write one letter that tells that individual why your institution is important to them personally and is important to their community. And if everybody around the country, every museum professional asked their community, their museum community, their visitors, their donors, their members to write letters like that, then our elected officials are going to start hearing from people about how important museums are to our communities. And it'll make a difference in the long run. But we're not doing it now. They're not hearing from us enough. And it's time to start. There are resources on our website, and there will be by tomorrow, I guess, but anyway, close. But it can be an email, it can be a telegram.
They're going to be busy
It can be
tomorrow.
anything, you know, it doesn't matter. But have them communicate. Maybe it's a visit. Come to Advocacy Day, but ask them to communicate with somebody about why your museum is important.
That's terrific. Terrific advice. All right, so we got a few questions here from the audience.
Unscripted questions.
So I am very impressed with the information I get in regular emails from the Center for the Future of Museums. I think a lot of my colleagues aren't aware of the center, so please tell us a little more about it.
Well, that's a great question, and I get lots of great feedback about the Center for the Future of Museums and the dispatches that they put out. And the center is our attempt, it's part of its AAM program, and it's our attempt to allow the museum field to begin talking to people we haven't always talked to in the past. People in higher ed, people in philanthropy, in government, in higher ed and K through 12 ed, and other elements of society, areas of society that we really haven't had a dialogue with. How do they see the future of museums? How do they see museums affecting their work? How can we work better with them? What are the opportunities for both of us? So we've had some very interesting conversations around how we can do a better job of promoting, and I'm working closely with Beth Merritt on this, how we can do a better job of communicating the fact that we are essential educational institutions. We're working with ILI, the Institute for Learning Innovation. We're working with an organization called KnowledgeWorks in Cincinnati, which is very, very interested in how kids are learning out of school, which is our area. So that's basically the challenge for the Center for the Future of Museums. They looked at the demographic trends. things that you might want to know, but how can we look around the corner a little bit, and how can we communicate that to you?
Thank you, Ford. A couple of questions here have to do with accreditation. And specifically, how can accreditation be streamlined to make it more accessible to ordinary museums, or whatever the case might be?
That's a great question, and it's a plant I had it put in, but anyway. Accreditation is extremely important, and the reason it's important is it's important on many levels, but as we're going around saying to elected officials and to funders, private funders, look, our institutions are essential. They are, as I've just said, core educational institutions. We want to be able to say, and we are committed to a shared standards and best practices. We have a demonstrable commitment to the highest standards of the field. That's accreditation. Okay, that's the good side. The bad part is it's Byzantine right now. It's complicated. And we are in the middle of making every effort to reinvent accreditation. We've begun that process. We got a grant from the Kresge Foundation. We got an IMLS. We worked with McKinsey on phase one. Consultants, McKinsey & Company, they're great. They're not cheap, so every now and then we have to take a breather and raise a few more shekels in order to keep going. But Julie Hart, our Director of Standards and Best Practices, that is her job description right now, is how do we reinvent accreditation? And how do we reinvent it to make it more accessible? And if it's more accessible, more museums will be accredited, and then it will have more significance because it'll be recognized more broadly than it is. We'd like it to be modular so that smaller museums could say, I'm going to do this part now, and I'll do another part later. We'd like it to be collaborative so that if we're working with a history museum, if you've gone through the AASLH STEPS program, that's part of accreditation. So we bring that into our accreditation. Or if you're a zoo or aquarium and you've done AZA accreditation, that's part of AAM's accreditation. I mean, that gets you towards AAM's accreditation. So it isn't one size fits all. How do we customize it a little bit for type of museum? But the key is to make it more accessible. There's simple things we can do. Subsequent accreditation does not have to be as complicated as it is. Why should you have to produce on your 5th accreditation your incorporation documents? They probably haven't changed. And then you have to find them. And we've got them anyway. So how can we get rid of the minor nuisances? So we are working on it. It's a top priority. I think accreditation is more important than ever. I think for the success and strength of our field, we need that shared commitment. And that commitment to excellence is what binds our very diverse field together. From public gardens to zoos and children's museums and historic houses and all of us art museums, that shared commitment to excellence is a unifying force for us.
Well, we only have time for one more question, and I think this one is maybe a little bit of a personal one in a sense. There are a lot of folks that have sort of a vague idea of what happens at AAM, what kind of organization is it, and so forth. Give us just a quick synopsis of what is the day in the life of Ford Bell look like? What do you actually do? And you can spare us all some grisly details, but just how does AAM work, and how do you work?
You know, and asked me that question. I've got 2 board members here. Carl Knoll from Historic New England and Lori Norton Moffat from the Norman Rockwell Museum. So, you know, maybe I should plead the 5th. You know, we have a strategic plan in place, and a great strategic plan, very detailed, the Spark. And I spend a huge amount of time, you know, working with my colleagues in the office on that, which is going to be extremely important for the success of AAM and for strengthening our field. And my goal is to see that at AAM we have the right people in the right positions, doing the right work, and then for me to try to stay out of the way so they do great things without my stepping on their toes. I spend a lot of time in government relations. I spend a lot of time communicating. I want to hear from people, and I do hear from people, and I want to hear from you, fbell at aam-us.org. That's -US we put in to confuse you, but that's, if you send me an email, I'd love to get back to you. And working with our fellow museum service organizations, because I like to think of us, all of the art museum directors, Children's Museum, Association of Children's Museums, Science Technology Centers, Public Gardens, zoos and aquariums. I like to think of us in many ways as one organization. We work together to strengthen the broad museum field, and I spend a lot of time on that as well.
Terrific. Well, I do have to say that AAM has been a great friend to NEMA, and we're working on a number of joint initiatives at this point. Your staff is absolutely fabulous, and I can see where they truly enjoy working with you as well. So, folks, why don't we give a round of applause to Ford Bell. Thank you, Ford.